Number 1. Pairing pieces up efficiently. This is almost always extremely important when it comes to first block, as your pieces are rarely ever all paired up for you, and you just have to insert them. Usually you will have multiple pieces that you need to pair up during your first block. There are many, many, many ways that you can pair pieces up in order to insert them, and it's very important to choose the most optimal way, because if you consistently choose a less optimal and less efficient way of pairing them up, then it's really going to cost you, as the number of pieces you pair up adds up. So here's some examples of things that I try to look for to help me find more optimal solutions to pair up and insert pairs. For instance, the first thing is that you want to be setting up into a one move away from your first block, or even if you're doing line, you want to be solving them. You want to be pairing them up into their correct position. So try and set them up into positions like this, this, or this, and the same applies on the back, where either the first block color is on bottom or on the right side if you are doing one of these like inverted ones or whatever, or on the top if you're doing something like this. Sometimes though, you just can't set them up directly into an insert, and so you're going to want to be setting them up into something that's one move away, or just generally not going to take a lot of moves to set up to an insert. So generally my rule of thumb is that if the first block color is on the side like this, then you can do it like so. But if it's not, and it's something like this, then it's generally going to take like 3 moves, and you don't want to take 3 moves to set it up, 2 or 3. That's just not optimal. And then also, you want your first block color to be on top, because if it's not, then it's going to take more moves to insert. Same applies on bottom. If I could set it up, yeah, like this. You see how the first block color is yet again facing the front or back, and it's not facing the bottom, then this is going to take like 3 moves to insert or something like that. The final tip I have for you, and I know this will be difficult for some people, is to use your brain. You're going to really want to use your spatial reasoning here, and just like thinking in general to come up with optimal ways to pair them up. As I said before, there's many different ways to set up pieces. So for instance, for something like this, I like to set up into this. Here, I'd want to set it up like this, because it's really hard to set it up directly and into an insert. So just use your brain to come up with many different ways that you could pair pieces up, and choose the most optimal one using the tips that I've just described to you. Number 2, pairs. There are generally 2 different types of pairs that are useful during first block, and it's important to be able to identify them and recognize whether it will lead to a more efficient or optimal first block, because this can be really helpful when you're trying to plan it in a short period of time, for instance, inspection. It's important to look for 2 types of pairs. I have them here. You have your F2L pair. If you're not color neutral, this would be hard to imagine as an F2L pair, but it's a red F2L pair if you did Red Cross. Also, I call these half pairs. I don't know what you'd want to call them, but it's when you have an edge and a center matching. If you're X2Y color neutral, then it only works if it's not your top and bottom color. So no matter what color neutral you are, if it's a middle layer color for you, then it'll be fine. But if it was something like this, ignore that corner. If it was something like this, this is not useful to us when building our first block, unless you solve your first block on orange or red or something. So since I have these 2 and they're both for the same first block, like this is corresponding with this, that obviously helps me realize that this would probably be a very efficient first block. Number 3, order doesn't matter. You don't have to use this rigid method for solving your first block. It's really wrong to do it that way, because first block is a very intuitive and free step. You shouldn't be like solving your DL edge and then solve front pair, back pair, and you're done, like checklist thing. In fact, many times it's better to ignore order, and sometimes you'll find that it's very easy to preserve a pair, or it doesn't require any extra moves at all to preserve a pair while you insert one of them. So for instance, I might realize that my second pair of my first block is set up halfway through pairing up my first pair, and I'll set them up and they'll be paired and easily preserved. And so that way I've actually paired them up and inserted them in a different order from what you would expect, and it can lead to more efficient solutions. Now, if I'm being entirely honest with you, this doesn't happen all that often, but when it does, you feel really cool, one. and two, it can really help your efficiency. If you see two pairs and you see one of them first, that doesn't mean you have to insert it first. Or if one of them looks like it's easier to set up first, you should check to make sure which one's going to lead to a more optimal first block. Number 4, use line. Now this can be really important in situations like this where I have already built my first square and I have my last pair, and as you can tell, this looks really ugly as a last pair. I would generally just try and avoid this situation as much as I can. But this is actually like 3 moves from being done. And the thing is that line can be extremely useful, and you can really mix and match when you use line and when you use square first for solving your first block. For instance, I built a square, and now I'm going to use a more line type way to solve this last pair. So I would insert the corner and then insert the edge because the edge is set up here. As I showed you in that example, using line can be extremely helpful. The important thing is to know when to use it and when not to. For instance, here you might think that this looks easy for a line, and it is. It's 1, 2, 3, 4 moves. But actually you can solve this in 3 moves like this. So it's still important to use your brain and think of more optimal ways. Now, the important thing that I use just as a rule of thumb is I know positions where this edge is easy to solve with line. So for instance, like here or here, as long as it's oriented in the top layer, it's generally good. And then here is good. This is not as good. This is also not as good. These two are not as good because of how you move the wide U's around, and that affects its position. This is good. Generally, that's about it. Number 5, inspect your full first block. This one is also really important, and I fail to do it a lot more often than I cared to admit in my solves, and it kills me. I'll be honest. You end up wasting moves because you didn't think through the solution and you're reacting off impulse, and you also end up pausing because you don't know where the pieces are or how to solve them, and it ends up wasting a lot of time and moves that could be saved. I am not kidding when I say that this is really, really important, because I failed to do it, and when I decided to start focusing on it and turned off my WCA inspection of 15 seconds and just planned my first block every time, my averages dropped by an entire second. I was averaging low 17s, and afterward I was averaging low 16s. This is really important, and it's something that you really need to be able to do in order to improve. Hey, I'm trying to hit 100 subscribers, so I would really appreciate it if you subscribe and hit the bell. If this video helped you, then go ahead and like it, because that way more people get to see it and it can help more people. Also, tell me what you thought of this J-Perm style video. I don't know whether you guys like this. It was kind of fun to make, but also a little boring. So, with all that said, bye.